Well, yeah.
Does that mean every single question has gone through the experimental?
Every single question has gone through the experimental section. In fact, every question, the LSAT is the most tested standardized test out there from what I understand. More so than the SAT, whatever you want to say, whatever you want out there. They're trying to make it the most fair test available. So, for example, if a question goes through an experimental section and women perform better on that question than men,
They drop it.
it's out. Has to be within statistically insignificant differences or whatever that phrase is. The margin of error has to be smaller. Yeah. Anyways, the difference between different groups has to be very small.
This may be like reading too much into it, but experimentals are always on in February testing. Is that actually representative of everyone who applies to law school, since most people generally apply?
No, just really quick. I think what happens with the experimentals is that they'll give. So your test, this test has 4 sections, right?
And the one
So,
experimental there.
and one of them was in here, and that was used for a future test. But these 4 sections came from previous tests, but they came from previous months. So section 1 might have been the experimental tested in February. Section 2 might have been tested in June. So they get a diverse group of people taking your test. Your test is not going to be scaled on the basis of everyone who took it in June. Yeah.
Sorry to get off topic here.
No.
But the experimental sections, they don't, it's, the whole section is not taken and put into the test for real. They take questions. So, like, does that make sense?
I think they actually, I think they may try to replicate it as much as possible.
So, an experimental section from a past test could be an entire section in a new test.
I think that's a reasonable possibility.
So if you theoretically took like a huge number of LSATs, is that what they cap you at a certain number?
Yeah, I don't know. But from what I understand, these experimentals were these sections were experimentals like as much as 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So your odds of running into one are low. Yeah.
Oh,
And you know, if you did, it wasn't released. So it might be like this figment. You're like, oh, you never saw what the correct answer actually was.
Right.
So you're like, well, I thought it was A then. I think it's A now. It doesn't necessarily help you because you haven't had a chance to really talk about it with anybody and change your mind. So, yeah. Cool. Anyways, your last comment on that might be relevant to you. Your odds, any guess what kind of experimental section you're likely to have? Logical reasoning, because they have to make 2 for every 1 game and 1 reading comp. So half the people in the room will be doing LR, half the people doing, or 25% will be doing reading comp, 25% will be doing games. And it's random.
So everyone
has a different experimental section at a different time. So it's really important to recognize that, because if you're like doing a game section, right, and you do the first game in like 5 minutes because it was an easy game and you turn the page, and someone else had a reading comp passage which would probably take like 8 or 9, even if it's easier just because it's reading comp. Or let's say you're the reading comp person and the person next to you is the games person. They might turn the page and you'd be like, shit, they're going fast. Who knows what they're doing? You don't know what they're doing unless you look over at them. So you just, you can't think too much about it.
Are most people able to recognize when like you're taking an experimental section?
Most people think they are able to, but they're not able to. And Evan, you're gonna go ahead.
No,
I was able to.
No, I was not.
Oh, okay.
Because I thought that really weird question with the offices
Mm-hmm.
from, was it last week?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an experiment.
Yeah, oh, it was experimental.
It was the
Let's take a break
weirdest
here.
game I've ever seen.
Yeah. See, that's the problem, is that weird stuff happens, and it has to happen sometime and become official. And so there are 3 people every year who do predict the experimental section. And they get 180 on the test, and they put E all the way down for the experimental section.
I heard that too.
Yeah, so the reason we know about this is because there's an hour-long YouTube video by the dean of UVA Law School, who was the president of LSAC the president of LSAC rotates from deans at the different law schools because the law schools own LSAC, and so they just rotate the president around. They say, "Hey, you're president, huh?"
It's a racket.
It's a racket, yeah, it is, and they make millions of dollars nonprofit. Okay,
Billions. I think it's billions.
seriously, like
That's why I was.
the biggest expense of this class is not the space in DC. It's these tests.
Yeah.
So a larger portion of what you paid is going to LSAC than to this institution.
I was trying really hard not to laugh when you were talking about making it equitable because of that.
Yeah.
Like, if you have to pay for everything, then it kind of makes it hard for people across the ranges. But you didn't take this class for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. But another quick follow-up question. Does that mean there's any special reason February LSAT tests are not disclosed?
They're not disclosed so that when a natural disaster occurs, which does happen, if you think about, the test is being administered all over the world, and some test centers are not going to deliver on test day. Something's going to happen, flood, whatever. They reschedule those people for the next week, but they will not give them the test that was just given out of fear that people will reveal information, right?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so they will give them a February test that had not been disclosed earlier.
That makes sense now. Thank
In fact, if you look at the time zones around the world, the people who are taking it in London are taking it later in the day so that you can't have coordination between London and California.
Right.
You're like, well, my friend's in UK and they said the fourth game was a doozy. I don't know what that would do for you, but they could tell you some things about the game. They're like, oh, watch out for this rule.
Yeah, like
So,
17:30.
Some people actually remember the games. It's weird. They email me and they're like, oh, so this is what the game looked like. And they're like, da 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 da. They write out all the rules. I'm like, holy smokes. You have a photography. Photographic. It's kind of like photography. Anyways, okay, so what was the question?